History beyond sleep, where the secrets textbooks tried to bury finally awaken. Tonight,
in the soft hush of dusk, when shadows stretch long across the sea, and the scent of salt clings to the wind, we find ourselves drifting backward, not just through years, but into ages worn thin by time. The Bronze Age, they called it, a time of shining metal and empires that breathed like living beings, a time when kings wrote to kings, and ships stitched the world together like thread to cloth dot, from the highlands of Hatti to the golden palaces of Egypt, from the distant shores of Mycenae to the desert-wrapped cities of Canaan. The world was not yet modern, but it was marvelously connected. Languages differed, but trade spoke fluently. Copper from Cyprus, tin from Anatolia, cedar from Lebanon, all flowing like lifeblood. Through a network vast and fragile dot, it was a world both glittering and brittle. Yet even in this gilded harmony, there was an undercurrent, a murmur soft, at first like distant thunder over the sea. Somewhere beyond the horizon, people were moving. We do not know their names, not truly. The names we have were given by their enemies, carved into stone by trembling hands. Sheridan, Peliset, Denian, Equish, names wrapped in uncertainty, some sounding strangely Greek, others eerily Phoenician. But even these labels may not be theirs. They remain as masks, blurred and borrowed dot, and so we call them the Sea Peoples. They did not come all at once. No single armada, no thunderous invasion, but over time, over decades, their presence thickened. Like mist before a storm, port cities grew nervous. Watchtowers scanned the distant waters, and in the palaces of aging kings, messengers arrived with dire news. They are coming. But who were they? Raiders, some said. Mercenaries without loyalty, hungry for gold and grain. Refugees, others whispered, fleeing drought, famine, or the collapse of their own lost lands. And still others feared they were something worse, an alliance of the broken, the desperate, and the ruthless. A storm made not of wind and wave, but of people with nothing left to lose. They sailed swift ships, long, low, and unfamiliar. Unlike the broad merchant vessels that crisscrossed the Mediterranean, these were crafted for war, sharp, silent, swift. They arrived like ghosts at midnight. And when they did, cities burned, Ugarit fell, Troy flickered. The walls of Hattusa cracked like bone, but still we are early in the tale. The wave has not yet broken. Tonight we rest in the tension before the strike. We walk among a world unaware that it is ending. In Egypt, pharaohs still speak with the voice of gods. In Mycenae, bronze blades still glint in training yards. In Cyprus, ore is smelted for trade, not defense. And in Canaan, temples rise and markets sing. But already the signs are there. Crops falter, trade grows tense, and the old alliances creak under strain. Some sense the shift. Priests dream of burning skies. Scribes misplace messages. Kings glance uneasily at maps. The sea no longer a promise, but a question. Even the weather changes. Drought creeps like a thief. Wells run shallow. The wind grows dry dot, and still. No one speaks the full truth aloud, not yet. For in ancient worlds, prophecy and fear often dance too closely. To name the threat is to summon it. And so the Sea Peoples remain unnamed, even as they gather. Perhaps they too felt the wind changing, Perhaps they did not begin as destroyers, but as survivors. Families turned fleet, islands turned barren, lands turned away. Perhaps they sought not war, but safety. But history does not always care for intention. We know only this. By the time the world began to understand the danger, it was already too late. The Sea Peoples were not merely a force of war, they were a harbinger of unraveling. And like a thread pulled from fine fabric, their touch revealed the fragility beneath the gold. And yet, even now, the story refuses to resolve. Who were they? Where did they come from? Why did they disappear so completely, so quickly, as if swallowed not by time, but by design? Some say they were erased. Others say they never truly existed as one. And a few, quieter still, suggest the truth was buried deliberately. A cover-up, a scapegoat, a myth that helped the powerful survive, collapse with dignity and tact. That is the mystery we begin tonight. The storm approaches. But for now the winds are soft, and the water is still so close your eyes. If you wish, listen to the lull of history, like waves on a distant shore. The Sea Peoples are coming, but they are not yet here. And in the space before their arrival, we can still imagine the world as it was, whole, shining and unbroken. Sleep gently, dear listener. The mystery has only just begun. Stone does not lie, but it speaks in riddles. When the voices of the past fall silent, when parchment crumbles and ink fades into dust, it is the carvings on temple walls that remain, cold, stubborn, and unblinking. And it is to those stones we turn now to search for the first true glimpse of the Sea Peoples. The sands of Egypt are rich with memory. Amid papyrus reeds and sunlit columns, the reign of Pharaoh Ramses III stands tall, a final beacon of order at the edge of the Bronze Age's collapse. His court was lavish, his reign lengthy, but the peace of his early years was broken by a terror unlike any Egypt had faced before. And so he wrote it down, not with words alone, but with pictures, paint, and stone. A story etched onto the walls of Medinet Habu, one of the great mortuary temples of Egypt's golden twilight. There, amid rows of towering reliefs, is the oldest known image of the Sea Peoples. They are shown mid-battle, on ships that rock above carved waves, warriors, clashing with Egyptian soldiers in vivid profile. Their helmets are feathered, their shields round, their swords curved like crescent moons. Some wear horned helmets, others crested caps. Their clothes are foreign, their formation tight. And in the chaos of carved war, it is clear they are not a scattered rabble. They are organized, intentional, coordinated, and yet the depictions feel exaggerated, stylized, as if drawn not to record, but to warn or perhaps deceive. According to the inscriptions beside the reliefs, the sea. Peoples came not only by sea, but by land, bringing with them nations from the north in a massive coordinated invasion. They attacked cities in Canaan, marched through Syria, and even reached the borders of Egypt itself. Ramses claimed victory. He wrote that he repelled them, that the Nile stood firm against the tide. And perhaps he did. But the cost was steep, and the cracks deepened beyond Egypt's borders. Those who faced the Sea Peoples were not so fortunate. The Hittites vanished. The great cities of the Levant burned. Urartu, once a hub of trade and writing, fell so swiftly that letters were left unfired in the kilns, still waiting to be baked, a moment of panic frozen forever. Other records emerge in shards, inscriptions. From Byblus and Cyprus, ruins in Mycene and Troy, layers of ash in towns once thought invulnerable. All of them tell the same tale, a sudden, violent end. But none name the sea peoples with certainty. Who were the Paliset? The Jekker? The Lucca? Are they tribes, confederations, ethnic groups? Are they even the same people? Or did Egypt give many faces one name to make a more palatable story? You see, the phrase sea peoples never appears in any ancient text. It is a modern label, a net cast wide by 19th and 20th century scholars trying to make sense of scattered chaos. The Egyptians spoke instead of nations of the sea, of foreign enemies from the islands, of those who come from the great waters. We call them the sea peoples not because they called themselves that, but because we don't know what else to call them. The Medinet Habu reliefs are detailed, yes, but they are also curated. Propaganda carved in permanence. Ramses needed his people to believe in his divine power. He needed them to see him as the protector of Mat, the sacred order. If the sea peoples had brought Egypt to its knees, the illusion would break. So the narrative was shaped. They were defeated. They were scattered. They were no longer a threat. But here's the truth. After Ramses' death, Egypt would never regain its full power. Trade routes faltered. Food became scarce. Laborers in Thebes went on strike for the first time in recorded history. The dynasty weakened. The empire contracted. And the sea peoples were never heard from again. It's almost too clean. They arrive bringing ruin. They are fought, defeated. They vanish. No records of where they fled, no graves, no temples, no trace. What kind? A people sweep through the known world, reshaping borders, collapsing empires, only to dissolve without legacy? That question lingers, like smoke after fire. Some suggest they were not a single people, but many, displaced tribes, collapsed mercenary states, drifting warriors, famine-driven migrants. Others suggest they were never a people at all, but a story. A scapegoat invented by rulers like Ramses to explain away the inexplicable. After all, if your empire crumbles under internal weakness, famine, or revolt, who will follow a failing king? But if you claim it was invaded, if you say the enemy was vast and foreign and other, then your weakness becomes resilience. In that light, the sea peoples may be a fiction laced with truth, fragments scattered across time, each one incomplete but compelling, a feathered helmet buried in Cyprus, a Mycenaean sword found far from home, a pottery shard in Canaan, unfamiliar in style. Echoes, not declarations, and in between these echoes, the stone speaks again, not with answers, but with absence. It is the silence around the sea peoples that is most deafening, the deliberate, aching silence, no monument to their triumph, number, epic tale of their journey, only the words of those who feared them, and perhaps those who needed them. To some, they are history's great villains. To others, history's great cover-up. What we know now is this: empires rarely fall from one blow alone. And the sea peoples, whether real or invented, were the face given to a storm already breaking. Tonight we rest beneath the carved stone of Medinet Habu, looking not at what is said, but at what is not. We let our thoughts drift through painted battles and sculpted waves, and we remember, not all who vanish are lost. Some simply step into shadow where history can no longer. Follow Dot sleep softly now beneath the echo of stone. The sea is not yet done speaking. Beneath the vast Mediterranean sky, countless islands float like scattered jewels, silent witnesses to tides of history and mystery. Many of these isles hold secrets, cradled by salt and wind, whispering tales, lost to time. Among them, scholars have long sought the elusive origins of the sea peoples. Did they emerge from these forgotten isles? Were they displaced islanders caught in the swirl of drought, famine, and war, forced from their homes to ride the restless waves? Or were these isles but way stations on a greater journey, shadows of a vanished homeland? The ancient records speak vaguely. The sea peoples are described as people of the sea, yet their homeland remains an enigma. Some inscriptions hint at origins in the Aegean lands of deep blue waters and mythic heroes. Others suggest the western Mediterranean or even beyond. Imagine a small island village where olive trees bow to the wind and fishermen cast nets beneath twinkling stars. Here lives were once simple and steady, shaped by the rhythm of the sea. But as drought sapped the earth and harvests failed, hunger gnawed beneath the surface. Fires might have flickered in the night, not only from hearths, but from burning homes. Families gathered what they could carry. Boats were made ready, heavy with hope and fear. And with trembling hands they set sail into uncertainty, chased by invisible storms. These refugees of the sea became wanderers, their identities melded and muddled by necessity and desperation. Their ships cut through waves as quietly as shadows, crossing vast and dangerous waters. They moved not as conquerors at first, but as survivors clinging to the fragile promise of tomorrow not yet. As they landed on foreign shores, fear met them. For the settled peoples, these newcomers were unknown strangers in a world already fraying at the edges. Trade routes tightened, cities fortified. Tensions simmered in the dark. Those whispered fears grew louder. Some scholars imagine the sea peoples as an amalgamation of many such wandering groups, displaced islanders, coastal tribes, mercenaries out of work. Their shared sea-bound experience became their common language, their defining trait. But if their roots were in these quiet isles, why do their names sound so fragmented, so scattered? The Peliset often linked with the Philistines of later history, the Shurden with possible ties to Sardinia, the Jekker whose origins remain elusive. Each name a thread pulled from the tapestry, sometimes tangled, sometimes torn. And even as these threads flicker in historical shadows, the islands themselves seem to hold their breath. Archaeological finds on some suggest sudden abandonment, layers of ash hinting at violence or flight. Others show signs of cultural shifts, new pottery styles, different weapons markers of migration or assimilation. The sea, vast and indifferent, was both a pathway and a barrier. It separated but also connected. Trade continued even as conflict simmered. Exchange of goods, ideas, and bloodlines wove a complex web beneath the surface of war and ruin. In this chapter of Whispers, we also hear the faintest echoes of resilience. Some island communities survived, transformed by the influx of new peoples. Others vanished entirely, swallowed by the relentless tide of history. And so, as we drift among these forgotten isles, The question lingers like a soft wave against the shore. What happens to those who lose their home? Who do they become when the sea carries them away? Do they fade like morning mist, or do they leave behind footprints in sand soon swept clean? Tonight we cradle these questions gently, letting them rock us like a boat upon a calm sea dot and azure. Breath slows, the waves whisper on, carrying secrets beneath a veil of stars. Sleep now, wrapped in the quiet mystery of vanished shores. Beneath the calm surface of history lies a storm not always spoken aloud, a collapse so profound it reshaped the ancient world like a whispered secret carried on the wind. The late Bronze Age, once a time of flourishing trade, diplomacy, and shimmering cities, unraveled quietly, piece by piece, as if the world was slowly holding its breath before exhaling a great sigh. This was not a sudden fall, but a slow melting of empires, a crumbling of pillars once thought eternal. The kingdoms of the Hittites, Mycenaeans, Ugarit, and even Egypt giants in their day began to falter. Their cities, once vibrant with life, grew silent. Walls that had stood for centuries cracked and fell. The intricate web of trade and alliance, which had bound diverse peoples together, frayed until it snapped. Some of this unraveling was natural drought swept through the eastern Mediterranean like a dry wind, parching fields and starving flocks. Earthquakes shook cities to their foundations, toppling temples and palaces. Famine and plague followed, casting a pall over the land. But these natural disasters were only part of the story. Interwoven with this tapestry of decline was the growing presence of the sea peoples, arriving like restless waves against a fragile shore. Yet their role in this collapse is far from clear. Were they the architects of ruin or opportunists swept along by the tides of disaster? The answer is as elusive as the fog that rolls over the sea at dawn. We find hints in broken tablets and fragmented scrolls, letters pleading for aid, royal edicts demanding reinforcements, tales of soldiers stretched thin and cities abandoned. These fragments speak of a world struggling to hold together, even as the foundations trembled beneath Dot and Ugarit, the great port city. Correspondence reveals a growing sense of dread. The ruler writes of raids, of refugees flooding in, of supplies running low. His words, once proud, become desperate, an echo of a world slipping away. Meanwhile, the Hittite Empire, stretched across Anatolia, fights its own battles not just against external enemies, but internal strife. Political infighting, assassinations, and rebellion weaken the state's resolve. And when the sea peoples arrive, the Hittites are already a house divided. Egypt, for its part, holds firm longer than most. The reign of Ramses III is marked by fierce resistance. His temple reliefs proclaim victory, yet the truth beneath the stone is more complex. Economic decline, labor strikes, and food shortages hint at a kingdom stretched to its limits. As the old order faltered, new powers began to rise from the ashes. The Iron Age was dawning, bringing new technologies, new peoples, and new stories. But the transition was neither gentle nor kind. It was marked by destruction, displacement, and the erasure of old worlds. Tonight we rest in the silence between these upheavals. We listen to the faint murmur of a world breathing its last, and wonder at the fragile balance between creation and collapse. The sea peoples may have been the wave that broke the shore, or the wind that scattered fallen leaves. Their true role remains a mystery, woven into the fabric of a time when the old world whispered its farewell dot as your eyelids grow heavy. Let these whispers settle softly in your mind. The past is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quietest voices that tell the most profound stories. Sleep gently, embraced by the hush of history's turning tide. The sea holds its secrets in folds of endless blue, its surface shimmering with light and shadow, a vast expanse that swallows the voices of the past. Ships once sailed these waters with purpose and urgency, cutting through waves like whispers on the wind. But some of those vessels, laden with mystery, vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but the soft ripple of unanswered questions. The sea peoples traveled by sea, swift, sleek, and silent ships built for both speed and stealth. Their vessels were unlike the heavy merchant galleys familiar to the bustling ports of the eastern Mediterranean. Long and narrow, with oars that sang the rhythm of movement, these ships seemed to glide just above the water, blending into the horizon. Yet the remnants of these silent ships are scarce. No grand wrecks lie gleaming on the ocean floor. No ancient docks bear their names. They vanish as completely as the people who sailed them. What stories might those ships tell, if only they could speak? Could they whisper of desperate escapes from dying lands? Of fires blazing on distant shores, forcing families to flee? Or of fierce battles fought under moonlight, where the clash of blades mingled with the roar of the waves? Maritime archaeology struggles to trace their paths. Few artifacts emerge, and those that do are fragmented. A broken oar here, a rusted sword there. Some scholars piece together clues from scattered shipwrecks, from pottery styles traced across islands, from weapons found far from their places of origin. The movement of the sea peoples was not a simple invasion, but a fluid and shifting migration across seas and coasts. Their ships carried more than warriors. They bore the hopes and fears of entire communities navigating a world in flux. Perhaps their mastery of the sea gave them an advantage, the ability to strike unexpectedly, to appear where least expected, then disappear before the enemy could respond. Their ships, like shadows on water, were vessels of both survival and upheaval. Their disappearance remains as deep and unknowable as the sea itself. Did these fleets dissolve into other cultures? Did they retreat to distant shores? Or were their vessels claimed by storms, swallowed whole by the capricious sea? Some legends whisper of islands lost beneath the waves, lands that might once have been homes, now vanished like dreams. Others speak of alliances forged on board, marriages made between strangers united by the sea. Tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine the gentle rocking of a ship beneath starlit skies. Hear the lullaby of waves, the distant call of seabirds, the soft creak of wood and rope. Feel the cool salt air on your skin, the endless horizon beckoning toward an unknown future. The sea peoples sailed into history like whispers on the wind, their ships silent, but their story still echoing faintly in the deep. Rest now, carried by the calm pulse of the ocean's heart. From the smoldering ruins of once great cities, faint voices rise like smoke, curling into a twilight sky. They speak not in words preserved on parchment, but in fragments of pottery, charred beams, and crumbled walls. These voices from the ashes are the whispers of those who lived through the twilight of the Bronze Age, caught in the shadow of the sea people's enigmatic arrival. Archaeology uncovers these remnants patiently layer by layer, site by site, revealing stories written in fire and dust. Cities like Ugarit, once a thriving port of music and trade, were reduced to blackened rubble. Letters left unopened, tablets half-burned, tell tales of desperation and abrupt endings. In the clay, the final chapters of daily life were frozen, a marketplace silenced, a feast never enjoyed, a prayer unanswered. The ruins are not merely evidence of destruction. They are echoes of survival and loss. In the ashes, archaeologists find fragments of foreign pottery and weapons, strange shapes, and unfamiliar markings that hint at new arrivals or invaders. These artifacts suggest a collision of cultures, a meeting point between the known and the mysterious sea peoples. Yet, even in devastation, life persisted. Some settlements show signs of rebuilding, adaptation, and transformation. New pottery styles, new burial customs, new languages inscribed on stones, these subtle changes suggest the blending of peoples, the weaving of new identities from the threads of the old and the new. The ash becomes a canvas, painting a picture of a world in transition. The sea peoples were not just destroyers, but also catalysts, reshaping societies in ways both violent and subtle. Their presence forced kingdoms to rethink alliances, fortify cities, and redefine themselves amid chaos. But what of the people themselves? Who were the mothers and fathers, the children, the elders caught in this upheaval? Their names are lost, their stories whispered only by the fragile traces left behind. In this quiet twilight, we remember that history is not only told by kings and conquerors, but by those who endure and adapt. The voices from the ashes remind us that even in endings, there are beginnings. As you lie still, imagine walking among those ruins, feeling the rough stone beneath your fingertips, smelling the faint trace of smoke lingering in the air. Hear the soft murmur of a world shifting beneath your feet, the breath of countless souls carried on the wind. Tonight, let the ashes settle gently around you, carrying you into dreams where past and present meet. Sleep peacefully, cradled in the tender embrace of memory and time. Before the world was drawn in the sharp lines of modern maps, before borders carved the earth like a patchwork quilt, there were only shifting waters, wandering peoples, and places remembered by stories and stars. The lands of the late Bronze Age were connected by trade routes that wove like silver threads across the Mediterranean, binding cities, kingdoms, and islands into a fragile, shimmering network. But then the web began to fray. Maps from the era are rare and fragmented, sketches drawn on worn scrolls or etched into stone, glimpses of a world on the brink of transformation. They revealed trading hubs, safe harbors, and the names of distant places now swallowed by time. Yet they also hint at the unknown, blank spaces where the sea peoples might have sailed from or vanished into, leaving no clear trace. These maps were not merely guides for merchants or warriors. They were reflections of how people understood their place in the world. The edges of known lands were often marked with dragons, sea monsters, or mysterious symbols, reminders that beyond the familiar lay uncertainty and danger. In this chapter, we drift through these ancient cartographies, letting their faded ink and carved lines lead us gently into the unknown. We imagine the hands that drew them, scribes under candlelight, scholars tracing coastlines from travelers' tales, captains charting courses by star and wave. The maps show a world both interconnected and precarious. The great cities like Ugarit and Mycenae are anchored firmly, their names shining bright. Yet the routes to the west and north toward the lands where the sea peoples might have come from are less certain, often marked with question and shadow. Perhaps the sea peoples were travelers who knew these waters well, navigating by stars lost to us now, their journeys mapped in memories rather than ink. Their arrival disrupted the delicate balance, like a sudden storm crossing a placid sea, but just as quickly as they appeared on these edges, they disappeared from the maps altogether, erased as if by an unseen hand. The places they left behind faded into obscurity, their names forgotten or replaced. Tonight, as you lie back and close your eyes, let the ancient maps unfold beneath your eyelids. See the winding coastlines, the dotted islands, the vast stretches of open water where mystery still lingers. Feel yourself sailing across these seas, guided by the soft light of stars long gone, drifting into the quiet spaces where history's shadows dwell. Sleep now, wrapped in the gentle embrace of a world both lost and found. Carried softly on the tides of time. History is not just what happened. It is what was recorded and what was carefully left unsaid. In the age of stone and scroll, truth was shaped not only by facts but by the hands that carved, the voices that spoke, and the power that preserved. And in the story of the sea peoples, there lies a silence too deep, too consistent, to ignore. We are told they came in waves, fierce, many-named, and unstoppable. We are told that they brought fire and ruin, that they were repelled by the might of Ramses III, that they vanished afterward like smoke and wind. But within this story are cracks, and within the cracks, questions. Why are these mysterious invaders spoken of almost exclusively by those who claimed to defeat them? Why are the details vague, the origins conflicting, the aftermath silent? And most of all, why did such a world-altering force leave no trace of their own? Could it be that this story, dramatic, heroic, complete, was shaped with purpose? Some scholars whisper of a cover-up, not a modern invention, but an ancient strategy, a tale told to explain a catastrophe, to protect reputations, to shift blame from within to without. Because the truth is, the late Bronze Age was already unraveling. Trade networks had grown brittle. Drought and famine darkened harvests. Internal rebellion stirred in courts and cities. Writing began to falter. The world was aching, not because of foreign raiders, but because of its own weight. And into that chaos came the sea peoples, or, more accurately, the idea of the sea peoples, a perfect storm, a convenient enemy. When cities fell, rulers could point to invaders. When food ran low, they could blame disruption by raiders. When temples burned, they could invoke the wrath of outsiders. The sea peoples became a name that covered many things: migration, starvation, collapse. They became a mask worn by a world that could no longer hold itself together. Medinet Habu. Ramses III carved images of triumph, his ships defeating the strange seafarers, his armies protecting Egypt's sacred order. But beyond those walls, Egypt's power dwindled. Laborers protested, resources thinned, and yet the story of victory endured. Because sometimes stories matter more than reality. Even the lists of tribes, the paliset, Sheridan, Jecker, and others may have been constructs, not precise identifications but vague labels for shifting groups. Some could have been allies once. Some could have lived within Egyptian lands before being cast as foreign. The evidence grows stranger the deeper we looked at no known leader of the sea peoples. No written language, no temples, no tablets, no monument built in their name, just names in the mouths of their enemies, and silence where their voices should be. It is as though they were erased or never unified at all. Or perhaps they were never truly meant to be remembered clearly. This, too, is power. The power not just to write history, but to unwrite it. In that silence, we hear echoes of something deliberate. A narrative crafted, a shadow given shape. The sea peoples as both real and imagined, part people, part parable. It would not be the first time. Throughout history, rulers have created convenient enemies to mask internal decay. Fear unifies. Fear distracts. And fear, especially of the other, lingers longer than any truth. And so the sea peoples may have been more than wanderers of the waves. They may have been history's most enduring myth, forged in the fires of crisis, sculpted by politics, and etched forever into stone. Tonight we sit gently with that possibility. Not to accuse, but to wonder. To remember that history, like the sea, is not always clear. Sometimes it is calm above and storming below. Sometimes it reflects only what it is allowed to show. Let that thought carry you quietly into sleep. You are drifting not through answers, but through mystery where truth and tale entwine, and the past murmurs softly from behind the veil. Close your eyes. The sea is still, but it remembers. Not every warrior comes with sword in hand. Not every. Invasion is a choice. Some come not to conquer, but because they have nowhere else to go. In the shadows of the sea people's legend, behind the battles, beyond the fire, lies a quieter story, seldom told. One not of destruction, but of displacement. Of people, not feared, but forgotten. Tonight, we sit beside those lost voices. What if the sea peoples were not an army, but a tide of the desperate? What if they were mothers and fathers, children and elders, driven from lands cracked by drought, from fields turned dust, from cities no longer safe? Imagine entire communities uprooted by collapse, their homes shaken by earthquakes, their harvests lost to famine, their rulers fallen to chaos. With famine and fire at their heels, they took to the sea. Not for glory, not for conquest, but for survival. Boats became lifelines, crude, creaking arcs upon a sea that was both savior and threat. They carried seeds, tools, scraps of cloth, fragments of memory, and they sailed toward the only hope that remained, new land. Any land, but they were not welcomed. To the established kingdoms, already brittle from their own unrest. These refugees appeared as raiders, foreign, unfamiliar, fearsome. Their ships arrived suddenly, their tongues strange, their customs unknown. And fear in fragile times blooms quickly. Were the sea peoples always hostile? Or did violence become their only option after so many doors were closed? When food was denied, when trade was cut off, when cities barred their gates, did desperation sharpen into necessity? In many cultures throughout history, those without land are often seen as threats. Migrants become monsters in the eyes of the settled. And stories shift. A starving family becomes a marauding band. A displaced people become a myth of terror. And over time, the truth blurs beneath fear and fire. But archaeology speaks softly of a different tale. Among the ruins of razed cities, we find not only weapons, but household goods, children's toys, cooking pots, lives, not just war. And later we see traces of settlement, communities rebuilt, foreign pottery styles blending with local clay, hybrid architecture, new words entering old languages. Perhaps the sea peoples, if they ever were a people, did not vanish. Perhaps they became part of the lands they once disturbed. Not conquerors, but neighbors. Not enemies, but ancestors. We see echoes of this in the story of the Philistines, thought by some to be descendants of the Peleset, one of the sea peoples named in Egyptian records. The Philistines emerge in Canaan, not as ghosts, but as settlers, with distinct pottery and a culture at once foreign and evolving. They brought pigs where none had been kept, worshipped gods unfamiliar to the land. And slowly they changed and were changed. The violent arrival may have been real, but it was not the end. It was the beginning of something new, messy, layered, and deeply human. In this softer light, the sea peoples become not a mystery, but a mirror, a reflection of what happens when worlds break, and people must choose between standing still or sailing forward. Tonight, we let go of the image of faceless invaders. Instead, we imagine them gathering at the edge of a scorched horizon, loading boats under a bruised sky, whispering farewells to lands they once called home. We see the mother clutching her child, the elder carrying seeds from a field that will never grow again, the boy staring at the horizon, where salvation and sorrow both wait. Let us remember, history is written by those who survive and often by those in power. But sometimes the truest stories are not carved in stone, but felt in the spaces between. In the silent ache of exile, in the longing for home, in the echo of sails on the open sea. So now, let your breath steady, and your thoughts drift out beyond the breakers. See them there, quiet boats on quiet water, drifting toward an uncertain dawn. They were not forgotten entirely. Not tonight. Not by us. Sleep gently in the hush between memory and mercy, when the sun sets over the Aegean that paints the sea in soft gold and deep violet, casting long shadows across crumbling ruins. Here, in these ancient lands of islands and capes, where olives still grow and stone paths still wind through broken columns, the sea peoples leave their faintest traces, not in clear lines but in silhouettes, for in the ashes of the Aegean world we may glimpse the shadows of their beginning. Long before the sea, peoples appeared in Egyptian texts or swept into Canaanite harbors. Something was stirring in the Aegean. The great palaces of Mycenae, Pylos, and Tiryns, once towering centers of wealth, knowledge, and kingship, began to flicker. They fell not all at once, but steadily. Like stars blinking out in a clouded sky, the linear B script used by the Mycenaeans to record their affairs disappears. The trade stops, the great storerooms empty, and the silence spreads across islands, across peninsulas, across time. What happened here? Theories abound. Internal strife, rebellion, drought, plague, earthquake, perhaps all at once. But some believe that the collapse of the Mycenaean world may be intimately linked to the rise of the sea peoples, not as victims of their wrath, but as their very source. Could the sea peoples have been displaced Mycenaeans? Disbanded soldiers, craftsmen, farmers, women, and children, all cast adrift by the fall of their citadels? Could they have taken to the sea, leaving behind a shattered homeland in search of refuge or renewal? There is compelling evidence. Some names listed in Egyptian records, like the Ekwesh or the Dena'in, bear striking resemblance to Achaean and Danaan identities from Greek myth. Pottery and weapon styles found in coastal Levantine sites show Aegean influence, and the Philistines emerging in the land of Canaan shortly after bring with them a culture that echoes the art and rituals of the Mycenaean Greeks. Even the stories of Homer, though composed centuries later, remember a time of wandering warriors after the fall of Troy, seeking new homes, fated to sail endlessly. Odysseus is one, Aeneas in Roman myth another. These echoes may reflect a real wave of sea-bound people, their homes lost, their futures unmoored. Perhaps the sea peoples were the children of Troy and Mycene, carrying with them the legacy of a broken world, not pirates or destroyers by nature, but survivors of collapse, drifting through ruin, trying to begin again, and yet, to the kingdoms they encountered, they appeared as invaders. How easily do those with nothing look like a threat to those with everything to lose. In the fading Mycenaean light, we also see something more subtle, the movement of knowledge. The sea peoples may have carried more than blades. They may have carried traditions, techniques, and beliefs. We see their influence in architecture, in tools, in domestic customs. They did not just bring fire. They brought change, and in that change, something new was born. The Iron Age dawned not in a sudden blaze, but in quiet, scattered sparks. Some of those sparks may have come from the ships of those who left the Aegean behind. Tonight, we linger on a wind-swept island where the ruins of a Mycenaean outpost sleep under stars. We watch the waves kiss the rocks and wonder what stories they carried away. We imagine boats drifting past, tired, determined, carrying generations on fragile planks of hope. The Aegean world faded, but its people did not vanish. They moved. They adapted. They endured. And perhaps, in their shadow, the sea peoples took form, not as a single army, but as a tide of those who refused to sink. Let this chapter remind us, even in endings, there are beginnings. Even in shadow, there is shape. And even in ruin, there is a whisper of legacy. Close your eyes now. Let the waves hush your thoughts. The Aegean dreams on, and its children still sail softly through time, along the banks of the Nile, beneath skies both ancient and eternal. The story of the sea peoples takes on its most vivid form, but also its deepest enigma. Egypt, the great kingdom of sun and stone, recorded the arrival of these mysterious mariners with dramatic reliefs and impassioned hieroglyphs. Yet within these chronicles, truth and legend entwine like reeds in the river's flow. The walls of Medinet Habu stand as a silent testament to this ancient encounter. There, Pharaoh Ramses III carved scenes of battleships aflame, warriors clashing, enemies vanquished. His inscriptions proclaimed triumph over a seafaring horde that threatened Egypt's very heart. But behind the grandeur lies a quieter, more complex tale. Egypt was a kingdom under strain. Its power, though formidable, was waning. The late Bronze Age was a time of unrest, harvests threatened by drought internal divisions simmering beneath the surface, foreign powers pressing at its borders. The Sea People's arrival was not merely an act of invasion, it was a symptom of a world unraveling. Egypt's chronicles reveal not just battles, but anxiety, fear of the unknown, fear of change. Who were these invaders? The Egyptians named them with names like Peliset, Shurden, and Luca, names that echo across the Mediterranean but remain frustratingly vague. Were they mercenaries, refugees, pirates, or a confederation of many peoples? The Egyptian records are both illuminating and elusive. They speak of great fleets, yet offer little about the invaders' origins or fate. They boast of victory, yet hint at the strain such conflicts placed on the kingdom. In reading these inscriptions, one hears the pharaoh's voice, proud, defiant, but tinged with uncertainty. And what of the aftermath? The Sea Peoples disappear from Egyptian walls, their ships sunk or scattered. But Egypt's troubles did not end. The kingdom itself began to fragment in the decades that followed. The chronicles may have been crafted to reassure, to inspire, to maintain order. They are as much about preserving a world on the brink as about recording history. Tonight, as you settle into quiet, imagine standing before those towering stone walls, tracing the figures carved into them. Hear the soft scrape of a chisel, the whispers of scribes long gone. Feel the weight of history pressing gently, and the fragile thread that holds the past together. Let the story of the Egyptian chronicles remind you that history is often a mirror, reflecting not just what is, but what we hope to be. And in that reflection there is a beauty and a mystery, soft as a whisper on the Nile breeze. Sleep now, carried by the gentle current of time, the Levant, a land where ancient rivers meet. The restless sea holds the faintest whispers of the Sea People's passage. Its sun-warmed hills and olive groves have witnessed countless stories, some sung, others hushed, woven into the soil like threads of quiet memory. Here, amid the ruins of cities like Ugarit, Byblos, and Aklon, the echoes of a world undone still linger. The clay tablets buried beneath centuries of dust speak softly of a time when fire swept through marketplaces and walls crumbled under unknown hands. In the Levant, the Sea Peoples were not merely invaders, but catalysts in a transformation both violent and profound. Trade networks, once thriving and intricate, faltered. Kingdoms that had flourished for centuries faltered or vanished entirely. The sea lanes became dangerous, and the land itself seemed to tremble under the weight of change. Yet, even in destruction, there were traces of resilience. Archaeologists have uncovered fragments of pottery, weapons, and tools that blend styles, the old mingling with the new. These artifacts hint at encounters between the Sea Peoples and local populations, moments of conflict but also of exchange. The story here is not just one of loss but of adaptation. Cultures shifted and intertwined, languages blended and new. Communities emerged from the ashes. Among these are the Philistines, whose name first appears in this region, carrying with them hints of Aegean heritage, yet rooted in their new home. They built cities along the coast, planted vineyards, and wove stories that would become part of the land's rich tapestry. The Levant's whispers remind us that history is not only shaped by rulers and armies, but by the everyday lives of those who endure. The mothers who rebuilt homes, the children who learned new tongues, the farmers who coaxed life from the soil once more. As you rest now, Imagine walking through the quiet olive groves, feeling the sun's warmth fading into dusk. Hear the distant murmur of waves, carrying stories from long ago. Let these whispers of the Levant settle gently around you, soft as a lullaby full of both sorrow and hope. And know that even in the darkest times, life finds a way to continue, to flourish and to dream. Sleep peacefully, embraced by the calm of ancient lands. In museums and storerooms across the world lie objects that seem to belong nowhere. A sword with a strange curve, a helmet with horns that echo no known culture, a shard of pottery bearing the fingerprint of a vanished hand. These are the artifacts without origins, silent remnants of a people whose story was never fully told. They are the scattered echoes of the sea peoples. Each artifact is a question. Who made this? Where did it sail from? And why was it left behind? Unlike the grand monuments of Egypt or the enduring cities of Mesopotamia, the sea peoples left no temples, no tablets inscribed with their thoughts, no cities stamped with their names. Instead, they left fragments, subtle, scattered, and mysterious, a cache of weapons in coastal Canaan, too finely made to be local. Pottery in Gaza, bearing patterns that resemble Aegean styles. Personal items, combs, beads, cooking tools. Familiar in use, foreign in design. Some items were buried in haste. Others appear in the ruins of towns they may have destroyed or settled. And some, strangely, are found in places where no battle was recorded at all. As if the sea peoples were not only raiders, but settlers, as if they did not just arrive in war, but remained in quiet. The challenge for archaeologists is profound. Without a language of their own, without inscriptions or written legacy, these objects become the only voice of a vanished people. And yet, voices without context speak in riddles. Were the Shurden, whose round shields are carved on Egyptian walls, the same people whose helmets were found in Sardinia? Were the Peliset, described as fierce warriors, the same people who later tended vineyards in Philistine cities? Or do these artifacts speak of something broader, a cultural ripple that spread across the sea, carried by both conqueror and refugee? We may never know for certain, and perhaps that is the quiet beauty of it. These objects do not demand answers. They ask only that we notice them, that we hold their weight and remember that once someone's hand shaped them, someone's eyes admired them, someone's life was carried alongside them. In this chapter of broken blades and faded designs, we see not just history, but humanity. For even in war, people kept small things, a child's toy, a carved trinket, a familiar bowl. They carried these objects not as weapons, but as memories, as pieces of home, even when home was lost. Tonight, imagine a quiet storeroom filled with such treasures. No crowds, no glass cases. Just you and the quiet things left behind. Reach out gently and pick up a fragment of the past. Let its silence speak to you. Let its mystery soothe you. Not everything forgotten is truly lost, and not every answer must be known to be meaningful. As you close your eyes, imagine those artifacts resting once again beneath starlit skies, buried in the earth, waiting for someone to care enough to listen. Sleep gently. Cradled by the objects time could not erase. History often paints its figures in stark tones, conqueror or conquered, invader or native, destroyer or builder. But the truth, as it drifts softly through time is rarely so defined. Sometimes those who arrive with flame and fear become, in time, part of the land they once disrupted. In the wake of the Sea People's arrival, the coasts of Canaan began to change. New cities rose where old ones had burned. Walls were rebuilt, markets reopened, and life, as it always does, found its rhythm again. Among these new arrivals were the Pelesit, a name etched on Egyptian monuments, now whispered by historians, as the ancestors of the Philistines. But were they truly the same? And if so, how did raiders become residents, warriors become farmers, wanderers become a nation? The clues lie in the ground. Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, Gaza, cities once thought Canaanite, reveal layers of cultural blending. In their earliest Iron Age strata, archaeologists uncover pottery unlike anything local, finely decorated vessels reminiscent of the Aegean world. The architecture shifts, diet changes. Pig bones, once rare, become common. Burial practices evolve. These changes suggest not just conquest, but continuity, adaptation. The newcomers did not simply replace the locals. They lived among them. They traded, married, learned, taught, and in time, their identities wove together. The Philistines emerged not as an isolated group, but as a people in transition, shaped by the sea, by the lands they touched, and by the people they came to live beside. In later centuries, they would become a fixture of the biblical world, remembered in texts not as mysterious migrants, but as established foes, a coastal confederacy, strong and distinct. Yet their origins remain whispered, uncertain. Were they the descendants of the Sea Peoples, or a people born from their legacy? And does the distinction matter when identity is always shifting, when history, like the tide, remakes the shore again and again? There is something deeply human in this transformation. To flee destruction, to arrive unwelcome, to endure suspicion, and yet to plant roots, to raise homes, to give your children a future where you had only survival. This is not only the story of the Philistines, but the story of displaced peoples across time. The Sea Peoples may have begun as a storm, sudden, feared, misunderstood, but in their wake they left seeds, and from those seeds new nations grew. As you lie still tonight, imagine one such city, its walls new, its people diverse, its markets noisy with languages and smells from many shores. Picture a child, born of two worlds, his mother from a coastal tribe, his father from across the sea. He plays near a well, unaware of the storm that brought his family here. To him, this land is home. History moves on. The sea is never still. Let that image stay with you, soft, hopeful, unhurried. A reminder that from chaos, order can grow, and that even those cast out by the waves can find a shore. Sleep now, wrapped in the warmth of a new beginning. Sacred texts often speak in symbols. They carry echoes of older truths, reshaped, remembered, retold. And sometimes, if we listen closely enough, we can hear the murmurs of real histories beneath the layers of myth and faith. In the pages of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, the Sea Peoples may still whisper, not by that name, of course, but in the figures who dwell along the coasts of ancient Canaan, in the enemies faced by early Israelites in names like Philistines, Caphtorites, and a Naki man doth the Philistines appear in Scripture not as strangers, but as powerful, organized people. They build cities, craft iron weapons, field armies, and most famously they clash with heroes, Samson, Saul, David. Their story is often told in conflict. Yet behind the battles lies something deeper, an acknowledgement of their presence, their permanence, their power. Many scholars now believe that the biblical Philistines are, at least in part, descendants of the Peliset, one of the sea peoples named in Egyptian records. If this is so, then their journey continues, from forgotten shores to Egyptian reliefs, to the sacred scrolls of Israelite memory. In the book of Amos, the Lord says, "Did I not bring the Philistines from Caphtor?" Caphtor, an ancient place name possibly linked to Crete or the broader Aegean, a distant island home, the memory of a migration. Elsewhere, the Philistines are said to come from the sea, not born in Canaan, but brought their in this light. The biblical narrative reflects not only theology, but a living memory of upheaval, migration, and cultural entanglement. It remembers the arrival of new peoples, their customs unfamiliar, their gods foreign, their presence both feared and acknowledged. There are even more ancient echoes. The Anakim, described as giants, tall, strange, unsettling. The Rephaim, the Zamzummim, the Avim, peoples displaced or destroyed as Israel's tribes moved through the land. Could these too be echoes of earlier migrations? Groups caught in the great churn of the late Bronze Age collapse? We cannot know for certain. The Bible does not aim to record history in modern terms. Its purpose is faith, not archaeology. But memory is memory, and even sacred stories can carry the fingerprints of real events. What is remarkable is that the sea, peoples so elusive in formal record, may live on most vividly in sacred tradition, not by their name, but through the lives they touched and the worlds they helped reshape. They may not have written scrolls, but they became part of a story written by others, woven into prophecy and psalm, into genealogy and law. Tonight, let us consider the power of story. How a people without their own written language can still be remembered in the scriptures of those who followed. How a migration by sea can ripple through centuries, becoming myth, memory, and moral lesson. Perhaps we'll never know if the Philistines of the Bible were the sea peoples of Egyptian walls, but the possibility lingers, soft and persistent, like the sound of waves beneath temple steps. As you rest now, imagine a scroll unrolling slowly, its ink faded but still warm, each word a step further back in time, toward ships on the sea, toward strangers arriving at twilight, toward a people remembered not in their own tongue, but in the language of those who watched them from the shore. Let that story wrap around you, part history, part dream. Sleep peacefully under a sky where the stars have seen it all. Sometimes history changes not with the clash of swords, but with a deep, trembling breath from beneath the earth. There is a theory, soft-spoken among scholars, but persistent, that the fall of the Bronze Age and the rise of the sea peoples may not have begun with war at all, but with the ground shifting beneath their feet. In this version of events, the first invader was not man, but earth itself. Across the eastern Mediterranean, from Greece to Anatolia, from the Levant to Cyprus, there are signs, subtle, buried, fractured, of something ancient and immense, a great wave of earthquakes, rippling across the region in the late 13th and early 12th centuries BCE. Walls collapse in layers untouched by fire, foundations slide off-center, streets buckle and twist, and in cities once vibrant, life seems to end not with invasion, but with disruption. At Troy, at Mycenae, at Ugarit, archaeologists find destruction with no clear cause. No arrowheads, no siege ramps, no chariot wheels buried in the mud. Just rubble, sudden, inexplicable, as though the world itself had shrugged, and the cities simply fell. Imagine it now, a warm evening, quiet and still. Children playing, merchants closing shop, a priest lighting lamps. Then the earth groans, low and terrible. The ground shudders, walls crack, oil lamps spill. Dust and screams rise together. And then silence. No enemy, no warning. Only the raw, ancient violence of the planet beneath our feet. In the wake of these quakes, chaos blooms. Roads become impassable. Storage silos rupture, temples crumble. Communications break down, and in the chaos, vulnerability spreads like a shadow. Now imagine this happening not once, but many times across dozens of cities, across multiple generations. Of these earthquakes came in waves. Then they did not merely topple buildings. They unraveled a fragile world, a world built on trust between distant cities, on trade, grain, tribute, and alliance. A world where the line between stability and collapse was already thin. And when the earth cracked that line, others followed: starvation, displacement, lawlessness, and eventually the sea peoples. Not as the origin of the collapse, but as one of its many children, people driven from their homes, fishermen from shattered harbors, farmers from broken fields, craftsmen from sunken towns. They took to the sea because the land no longer held them, and so the ships came, not all at once, but in waves, each bearing a story of survival, grief, and longing. To those already struggling to rebuild, they may have looked like raiders, but perhaps they were fellow victims, caught in the same tremors that toppled thrones. What is haunting about this theory is not its violence, but its silence. Earthquakes do not leave armies behind. They leave dust and questions. They erase answers. Into that erasure the sea peoples entered, filling the silence with movement, fear, and the reshaping of a region. They became the face of the chaos. But perhaps they were only its echo. Tonight, let us reflect not on conquest, but on fragility, on how much of civilization depends on steady ground, on seasons that follow rules, on the quiet assumption that the world beneath us will hold. And let us wonder, how would we remember those who came after such a fall, as invaders or as survivors? Let your breath slow and feel the weight of the earth beneath you, solid, ancient, familiar. Then imagine a time when it was not, when even stone betrayed its trust. Sleep gently now, in a world that, for tonight, remains still. And remember, sometimes it is not war that breaks a world, but the quiet tremble of something deeper. Beneath the vast skies of the ancient world, the seasons once followed a steady rhythm. The rains came, the rivers swelled, the crops grew in their appointed time. But sometimes that rhythm falters, and with it the fragile balance of life. Scholars now listen closely to the whispers. hidden in ancient pollen, in layers of soil, in the rings of long-dead trees. These quiet signals tell a story of change, a subtle but profound shift in climate that may have set the stage for upheaval across the eastern Mediterranean. Imagine, for a moment, a world where rains became scarce, where the summers stretched longer and the winters grew colder, where the rivers ran low and the earth cracked beneath the feet of farmers. In this world, harvests fail, grain stores empty, food becomes scarce, cities once prosperous begin to falter. The intricate trade routes that connected kingdoms across the sea slow to a trickle. People grow hungry. Fear grows with hunger. Climate change does not wage war with swords. It moves quietly, invisibly, but its effects ripple out from the smallest village to the grandest palace. Could it have been this creeping shadow, a drought, a cooling period, that undermined the great civilizations of the late Bronze Age? Many believe so. In Hittite lands, letters speak of famine and hunger. In Ugarit, a city once vibrant and rich, the archives suddenly end, silence replacing the bustling records. In Egypt, the great pharaohs face internal struggles alongside external threats. The sea peoples may have been drawn into this web of hardship, driven from their homes by scarcity, pushed onto the sea by desperation. Their arrival on distant shores might not have been a simple act of conquest, but a quest for survival. In this light, the sea peoples are not just warriors or raiders, but refugees of a changing world. Their story becomes a meditation on resilience and loss. What happens when the earth shifts beneath your feet? When the world you know becomes unrecognizable? How do we hold on to hope when the future seems uncertain? As you breathe slowly, imagine fields lying fallow beneath a sun too fierce, rivers shrinking to thin threads, families gathering, sharing what little remains. And yet, amid scarcity, life endures. Communities adapt, people move, cultures blend. The sea people's migration may be one of the earliest echoes of a story we still know too well, that of people displaced by forces far larger than themselves. Tonight, let this thought settle gently, that in every ending there is a beginning, that through drought and displacement the human spirit finds a way. Let the cool breeze of change soothe you as you rest, and know that even when the skies seem darkest, there is a promise of rain. Sleep now, wrapped in the quiet hope of a world forever turning. In the silence of ancient ruins, where stones rest like forgotten memories, one of the deepest mysteries remains: the voices that never reached us, the languages that vanished without a trace. The sea people sailed into history, but they left no known script, no scrolls or inscriptions penned by their own hands. Their words are lost to time, like whispers swallowed by the sea. We can hear them only faintly, through the names carved by others, through echoes in foreign tongues, through fragments of culture that hint at something spoken, but unrecorded. This absence is both haunting and humbling. Imagine a language, its sounds weaving the rhythm of daily life, the laughter of children, the prayers whispered at dawn, the stories told around fires. And now imagine all of that gone. No tablets to preserve their wisdom, no songs written down, no histories told in their own words. The languages of the Bronze Age world survive through scripts like Linear B in Mycenae, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Hittite cuneiform. But the tongues of the sea peoples remain a silent sea, unexplored and unknowable. Some scholars search for clues, names of gods that might hint at shared origins, words borrowed into neighboring languages, patterns in personal names carved on pottery. Others look at the Philistines, hoping that the fragments of their language preserved in the Bible or in later inscriptions might offer hints, but the truth is elusive. This silence leaves space for mystery, a vast ocean where we must navigate by starlight and shadow, piecing together fragments from others' stories. And in this silence there is a poignant beauty, for every lost language is a reminder of how delicate human memory is. How quickly entire worlds of thought and feeling can slip beneath the waves of time. It invites us to listen carefully, not just for words written on stone, but for the quiet presence of those who lived, loved, and dreamed. To honor not only what is recorded, but also what is lost. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, imagine the voices of the sea peoples, soft, unspoken, carried on the wind. The rhythm of their speech, unrecorded but real, a gentle murmur beneath the tides. Their stories may never be fully known, but their silence is its own kind of history. Let that silence wrap around you like a lullaby, and rest now, cradled by the quiet voices of the past. Even in times of turmoil, the gentle currents of exchange flow quietly beneath the surface, connecting distant lands through threads of trade and culture. The sea, peoples arrived in a world already woven together by merchants and travelers, a tapestry of goods, ideas and customs crossing seas and deserts alike. They did not simply bring destruction. They also carried with them fragments of their own culture, pottery styles, metalwork techniques, musical traditions, and beliefs. Through these subtle exchanges, ancient societies found ways to adapt, to blend, to grow. Imagine a bustling port city at twilight. Ships creak against the docks, their hulls heavy with wares, copper ingots from Cyprus, fragrant spices from Arabia, fine textiles from Egypt. Traders from different lands gather, their voices a melody of many tongues. In such a place, the sea, peoples might have traded their own crafts, their own knowledge. Perhaps the very things that once marked them as strangers became bridges to new relationships. Artifacts found in Philistine cities, decorated ceramics with Aegean motifs, for example, speak of a blending of cultures, of new identities emerging from old traditions. This exchange was not one-sided. The sea peoples absorbed local customs, embracing the gods and languages of their new homes. In this quiet mingling, the boundaries between us and them blurred. Trade routes became arteries of culture, pulsing with life despite the turbulence around them. Even in the aftermath of destruction, the flow of goods and ideas continued, a reminder that connection endures beyond conflict. Tonight, imagine those ancient ports, the scent of salt air mixed with spices, the clink of coins exchanging hands, the warmth of lantern light reflecting on water. Let this vision remind you that even in the darkest chapters, humanity finds ways to reach across divides. Sleep now, embraced by the soft rhythm of exchange and understanding. The world turns, and with it, new stories are born. As the sun sets on our story, as sea peoples disappear into the mists of time, their ships vanished. Beyond the horizon, their faces lost in the quiet waves of history. Yet their echoes remain, and shattered cities and mingled cultures and whispered legends passed down through generations. They remind us that history is not a simple tale of winners and losers. It is a tapestry woven from countless lives, each thread fading and reappearing, shifting with every telling. The sea peoples were more than raiders or refugees. They were catalysts of change, shadows crossing from one world to another, reshaping destinies in their wake. Their mystery invites us to hold space for the unknown, to accept that some questions may never be answered, and some voices may forever be silent. But even in that silence there is beauty, a call to listen more deeply, to imagine more widely. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, picture a calm sea beneath a moonlit sky, the gentle rocking of a boat, the soft sigh of waves against the shore, and beyond, the vastness of time stretching endlessly. In that vastness, every lost people, every forgotten journey finds its place. Let their story and their silence settle softly in your heart, and rest, knowing that even as the past fades, its echoes continue, quiet, profound, and eternal. Sleep well beneath the timeless stars. Long after the last oar slipped beneath the waves, the sea peoples continued to drift, not on seas, but through the currents of human imagination. Their story, shrouded in mystery and partial truths, has become a canvas for myths, theories, and dreams. Writers, historians, and artists have sought to capture their essence, sometimes as fearsome invaders, sometimes as lost refugees, sometimes as the catalyst of civilization's great turning points. In museums, their artifacts speak softly across the centuries, while books and documentaries retell their tale in whispers and speculation. But the true legacy of the sea peoples may lie not in the certainty of facts, but in the questions they inspire. Who were they, really? Where did they come from? What became of them? These questions encourage us to look deeper, to challenge accepted narratives, and to embrace complexity. In our modern world, where borders shift and cultures intermingle, their story resonates still. It reminds us that identity is fluid, that history is never fixed, and that mystery often holds as much truth as fact. Tonight, as you close your eyes, let the story of the sea peoples become a gentle reminder that some of life's most profound journeys happen not just across oceans, but within our own hearts and minds. Rest now, cradled by the endless sea of possibility. And dream of voyages yet to come. There is a quiet danger in the way history names its villains. In every age, when worlds collapse or empires falter, there is a need, almost instinctive, to point outward, to draw a line between us and them, to explain disorder through the image of an enemy, even if that enemy is as much myth as memory. For the Bronze Age world, that enemy became the sea peoples. But were they truly to blame? Or were they simply the faces drawn onto fear? When cities fell, when trade collapsed, when fire rose from the ruins of palaces and ports, someone had to answer for the silence that followed. And so stone walls in Egypt named them, reliefs shaped them, victories were carved over their imagined defeat. In this narrative, the sea peoples were many things: a confederation of tribes, a force of chaos, a scourge from the sea, but rarely, if ever, were they allowed to be simply people. We must ask, were they the destroyers of civilization, or the scapegoats of a world unraveling? History often turns outsiders into monsters. It's easier to blame the unknown than to confront decay from within. easier to point to foreign sails than to acknowledge the weakening of alliances, the drought in the fields, the failing of kings. The sea peoples may well have fought and raided. They may have burned towns and challenged armies, but their legend grew beyond their acts, a legend sculpted to serve the needs of survivors, of rulers who needed to claim triumph over something. And so, over time, the sea peoples became histories. Chosen villains dot, but behind every villain is a deeper story, a reason, a wound, a truth too complex for neat endings. Perhaps they were displaced by forces beyond their control. Perhaps they were fractured people seeking new homes, forced into conflict because no doors opened to welcome them. Perhaps they were simply caught in the same storm that tore through everyone else, only remembered because their sails were seen, their names were strange, and their voices never recorded. As you lie still now, let this thought rest beside you, that history is not just about remembering events, but about listening for the stories that were silenced. The sea peoples may have been feared, but they were also forgotten, not because they disappeared, but because it was easier that way. Let this chapter linger in your dreams as a question, not an answer, a call to empathy across time, a whisper that even the vilified deserve to be seen clearly. Sleep now, and let the waves carry you gently toward truth. Even the darkest figures in history may have only been walking through shadows cast by others. In the quiet spaces between history and myth, fragments of truth hide like scattered stars in a night sky. The story of the sea peoples is woven from shards ancient texts, broken pottery, carved reliefs, all whispering fragments of a tale only, partially told. No single source offers a full picture. Instead, each piece adds a layer to the mosaic, delicate and incomplete. Egyptian inscriptions tell of battles and enemies at their gates. Hittite letters speak of refugees and unrest. Archaeological ruins hint at sudden destruction, but the reasons remain elusive. These fragments are like echoes in a cavern, sometimes clear, often distorted, always distant. Historians sift through these pieces, weighing each carefully, aware of their own biases and the gaps that remain. The sea peoples appear as many faces, a coalition, a phenomenon, a mystery wrapped in the language of their time. What is certain is that their impact was profound, even if their story was left mostly untold. Perhaps the greatest truth in these shadows is this: history is never complete. It is a conversation across time, a dialogue between those who lived and those who listen. The fragments invite us not just to seek answers, but to embrace uncertainty, to recognize that some mysteries remain, to preserve the magic of discovery. As you rest, imagine holding a shard of pottery in your hand, rough, chipped, ancient. Feel the coolness of the stone, the whisper of stories it carries. And know that even in fragments, history speaks softly. Tonight, let the incomplete become a lullaby. Let the fragments of the past cradle you gently into dreams filled with wonder and quiet mystery. Sleep now, wrapped in the gentle glow of questions that invite you to explore, not solve. From the ashes of destruction, a new dawn gently rose, soft and uncertain, yet full of quiet promise. The collapse of the late Bronze Age was not just an ending, but also a beginning. As the sea peoples vanished from the pages of history, the world they left behind slowly transformed. New peoples settled the lands once held by great kingdoms. New languages took root. New ways of life emerged, shaped by the echoes of what had come before. The Iron Age was dawning, a time of reinvention and resilience. In this emerging world, the Sea People's presence lingered like a faint melody, a reminder of the power of change. Their disruptions may have hastened the fall of empires, but they also cleared the way for new stories to be told. Civilizations rebuilt from the ruins, blending traditions and forging fresh identities. In this delicate balance of loss and renewal, the Sea People's legacy quietly endured. Their story is a testament to the ever-turning cycle of history, where endings fold softly into beginnings. Tonight, as you settle beneath a blanket of stars, imagine the slow awakening of the world after the storm. Feel the first light brushing the horizon, gentle and sure. Let this vision remind you that even in the darkest nights, dawn is waiting. Sleep now, wrapped in the calm embrace of renewal and hope. And dream of new journeys, born from the tides of time. The sea is still now, its surface smooth, silvered by moonlight, whispering no more of war or wandering. The sails are gone, the oars are silent, and the Sea Peoples, those mysterious mariners who once stirred the tides of history, have faded into the foam of time. We have followed them across ruins and coastlines, through shattered palaces and ancient scrolls, through myths, silences, and scattered truths. And now, at the edge of the story, there is only the sound of waves. What became of them? Perhaps they were absorbed into the lands they touched. Names changed, customs blended, their children growing up far from the shores their parents fled. Perhaps their story was rewritten by those who survived them, reshaped, repurposed, obscured. Or perhaps they chose to vanish, carrying their stories only in memory, letting their legacy be felt rather than heard. Not every people leaves a monument. Not every journey ends with a map. The Sea Peoples remind us that history does not always speak clearly. Sometimes it moves like water, shifting, elusive, never quite still. They also remind us that disappearance is not the same as failure. To vanish is not to be forgotten. For here we are, thousands of years later, still wondering, still asking, still listening. They endure not in their name, but in the questions they left behind. And so this last wave is not one of conquest, but of quiet. Of the stories untold, of the traces they left in our imaginations, of the dream that some mysteries are meant to remain open, like a horizon we sail toward, but never quite reach. Tonight, let that wave carry you. Close your eyes, breathe with the tide, and let your thoughts drift gently out to sea, to where forgotten ships once sailed under starlit skies, to where voices once called across unfamiliar shores, to where history and dream become one. Sleep now, gently. The sea is calm. And the story rests.